Yes, as the slide says, my topic is on spirituality, religion and mental distress in Northern Ireland, and it being a tricky question, and I've particularly looked at social work practice. So in today's presentation I'm going to discuss the literature informing the research question, and that's going to be quite a brief overview, and then the methods employed, and really the kind of meat of the subject, the discussion and the findings, and hopefully address any questions that you might have. And I would just encourage that questions are welcome, no matter how sort of small scale or big scale. We'll try my best to answer them and hopefully get discussion going as well. So these are the three key bodies of research that informed the study. And so in the first circle there, in the purple one, it was the sociology of religion and spirituality. And in the literature, I could see that there was a dichotomising of religion and spirituality. So there was sort of like a prioritising of one being above the other. And this is really about spirituality sort of being more acceptable, more, I suppose, trendy almost, if I dare say that word. But, it was more acceptable to talk about spirituality, but to be religious or to talk about religion was almost sort of secondary to that. And so in the thesis, I was very keen not to sort of create that dichotomisation. So I talked purposefully about spirituality and or religion, and although that is quite laboursome, it's to really emphasise the equal importance that both are given, and that the study is very inclusive of both spirituality and religion, and is inclusive of religious and secular expressions of spirituality. So, and within that, what does religion mean in Northern Ireland? Historically, we have a very comfortable or big awareness of sort of the politics and secular or sectarianism and conflict and division. But what do these concepts actually mean to people in their individual everyday lives? What does religion, what does spirituality actually mean in terms of their own meaning making, their own understanding of their own lives? And so we talk about it being, that religion and spirituality might be evacuated of all meaning in Northern Ireland. So this sort of idea of the transcendent, the meaning-making, the purpose-finding that people might find within their own religion and spirituality, that we have a lack of sort of discussion about that, or a lack of, that we're not very comfortable talking about those ideas. So this is really what I was trying to get at in here. And also this idea of transcendence, so this other world, this meaning-making has been forgotten, what it might mean to people personally. And within that, I draw on the work of Wood and he's based in Queen's University, so it's sort of Northern Ireland based, but he talks about a theory of social fields. And in this, he talks about, I drew that religion, spirituality and mental distress within the service user social worker relationship. So the theory of social fields examines the relational, so examines how religion and spirituality are engaged within that relational dynamic, but also then leaning towards and being aware of the social and political context around that, which is very appropriate for social work practice whenever we're dealing with, we're engaging with service users, engaging with families, and we need to be aware of the social and political context around that relationship. And he drew upon, in his own work, he talked about New Age spirituality in Nottingham, and these were people who were engaged in New Age spiritual practices. And rather than their practices, although they were saying that they weren't religious and that they were engaged in sort of New Age spiritual practices that were separate from religion, their practices were still located within the religious field, because they were maybe actively choosing to separate themselves from religion, but it was still relevant to their separation from it. So it was still a relevant concept to engage with. And in the green circle, we've got the mental health literature. And in this, there's controversy in the UK regarding the role of religion and spirituality within mental health and wellbeing, and there's discussion about that. But the service user movement advocates for the recognition of religion and spirituality in their experience of mental distress and mental ill health. So whilst professionals may not always be comfortable talking about religion and spirituality within mental distress, the service user movement is sort of saying, this is part of our identity, this is part of who we are, we want the space and to be able to talk about this. So, and in this, I drew upon the work of Beresford and colleagues, and they were concerned about the lived experience of impairment not being included within services and not being recognised. So for mental health service users, this is the idea that religion and spirituality as an aspect of their identity is not necessarily included within services and professionals that engage with them. And so it might be seen as a barrier to their being, a barrier to their identity making and formation within the professional relationship. So that it might actually become a site of oppression, of discrimination, and so that Bereford's work prompted that consideration within this thesis, that is then how practitioners and mental health professionals engage with religion and spirituality in practice in Northern Ireland. Is it actually a potential site of oppression and discrimination? How it might be actually experienced in a disabling way? And is it actually recognised as a potential aspect of identity and actually of recovery as well? And I think it's interesting to note that religion and spirituality and mental distress has been developed within health and social care services in England and Scotland and Wales. So there is discussion around that. But ironically, whilst religion, and we all know this, is a defining feature of society in Northern Ireland, we have a historical legacy of it. It's severely underdeveloped here, and it's underdeveloped within policy and practice guidance. And it's asking that question, why? Why is that, and why have we not actively and purposefully engaged with that? So, studies initiatives in the rest of the UK, but why none in Northern Ireland? So in the red circle, we talk about, this is social work literature, and again, it's alluding to this spiritual and religion binary, and earlier talked about the sociology of religion and spirituality. So it's this idea that, it's okay to talk about being spiritual, but to say that you're, that religious or religion, that's more problematical. So there's controversy around this subject within professional discourse, and the profession is regarding as being very, very ambivalent about talking about religion and spirituality. And is it an appropriate subject for practitioners to actually be engaging with in their practice? And so, within this study, that there was that question of, is it okay? Is it even okay for us to talk about this subject? So, and the literature talks about that as well, that it is a problem term, and it's a difficult concept to engage with. And can the literature questions, can practitioners claim to be person-centred and claim to be delivering a holistic assessment if they decline to actually explore religion and spirituality within mental distress? And these are key questions to be asking about not just social work practice, but health and social care professionals engaging within mental health. So the subject is often advocated on the basis of cultural competence and minority ethnic groups, but I suggest that is actually discriminatory against those from non-white ethnic groups, because they're often perceived as being more religious and more spiritual. That if you see somebody from a minority ethnic group, there's an automatic assumption that they must be more religious or they must be more spiritual. And actually, even for those that are from white ethnic groups, that they might not be seen as being religious or spiritual, and there's a danger there of not actually engaging with that subject with them. And so in the thesis, I propose that it's actually about a person's identity, irrespective of cultural competence, irrespective of minority ethnic group. Although those are relevant questions, and relevant aspects of that, it's actually about the person's identity and engaging with them as a person, as opposed to their identity or their minority ethnic group. So this is the research question that the thesis was based on. So what, if any, is the mental health social worker role in exploring spirituality, religion and mental distress in Northern Ireland? And the study was small scale, it was exploratory, and it drew upon narrative inquiry. And I want to just talk a wee bit about the narrative inquiry, because we talk, research methods can be drawn upon in a very purist way, or just drawn upon and lent upon. And so in this study, I was very cautious about talking about narrative inquiry, because in its purest way, narrative inquiry can be, just asking an interviewee a question and letting them storytell. Narrative inquiry really promotes storytelling and memory recollection. And so there's some discussion in literature about how people claim to be using narrative inquiry, and the caution, being cautious about that, because in narrative inquiry, in this study, what I liked about it and what was useful about it was that it promotes that storytelling, it promotes memory recall, it promotes talking about the person's inner world and their own experiences and the subjective experiences. But I still had research questions that I needed to ask around, so I used upon it, I lent upon it, but there was still structure to the interview scheduling as well. So the participants, there were 12 mental health service users recruited from a voluntary agency across the trust that I accessed, and 12 mental health social workers recruited from the same trust. So they're all based within the same Health and Social Care Trust in Northern Ireland, but located in different offices in different places there. And there's 2 points I just want to talk about in terms of how the data was collected. Religion and spirituality are very hard to reach concepts, particularly in a one-off interview or even in 2 sittings of an interview. You know, if somebody were to ask you, you know, what does spirituality mean to you, you might be a bit sort of like, oh, I don't really know how to answer that in a one-off. And I was aware that it was a very abstract, can sometimes be quite an intangible concept to actually talk about. So participants were invited to bring an object which signified what religion and spirituality meant to them. And this was an opportunity to bring something very personal, very private from their own world, if you like, from their own private world into the interview setting. And it became a very, very powerful tool to enable both the service user and social worker participants to talk about the intangible in a tangible way, to bring the abstract into something meaningful that they could actually talk about in front of themselves. And crucially, even if a participant chose not to bring an object or said that they forgot to bring one, we were still able to explore, you know, okay, well, why did you not bring one? You know, what was the basis of that decision? You know, okay, I understand that. Okay, what might you have brought? So really going really, really deep down into that, into the use of the object. And if they didn't like the idea of bringing an object, you know, some people might say, well, you know, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, so they're not going to bring an object that means that to them because they don't have that meaning around it. So it's actually about really examining why that was. So it was a very powerful way of getting down to their inner being and to what it meant to them personally. And then half of the participants from each group were invited to a telephone interview, and this sought both participant and researcher reflexivities. So this was about asking participants what they thought about taking part in the research. Were they uncomfortable with, you know, how did their ideas about religion and spirituality develop through the research, through the interview? Did they have any thoughts or ideas after the interview was conducted? So really engaging with the emotional aspect of the interview. And also then, you know, it was quite incredible in the interviews where some social worker participants actually became quite tearful during the interview, and there was quite a lot of emotion around the subject. And so it was useful in the follow-up telephone interviews to say, you know, was that difficult for you talking about that? You know, why was that? And really engaging with them. And it was about charting sort of researcher and participant reflexivities and being able to see where I was congruent with them, you know, in the interview journey, and being able to identify difficult emotion within the interview, and also being identify places where the participants seemed to really enjoy talking about an aspect of their own background and their religion and their spirituality. So engaging with that reflexivity was very, very important within the study. And I know that participants were probably less willing to be critical because it was me that was doing the asking over the telephone. But the exchange, you know, that the telephone interview still enabled that exploration about their research experience. And it was particularly, as I said, useful to examine the emotion and the kind of the reflection as well after the interview occurred. And the study design actively sought throughout, and this is the work of Wood earlier on, to locate that individual account within the broader social context. So it wasn't just about the subjective experiences that people were talking about, but it was actually about locating those within the wider social political context around them. Okay, so these are the service user objects, and I've brought a selection of these today from the photographs. And most service users brought an object. More service users brought an object, and more of these objects were religiously based. And as I've said before, the object was a very powerful way to get to the heart of what religion and spirituality meant to participants. And earlier I indicated that spirituality and religion are hard to reach concepts, because they're abstract and they're highly personal. And much of our own understanding of what religion and spirituality means to us personally is based on experience, and it can be difficult to articulate that depth of meaning just, you know, in a one-off interview experience. And also in Northern Ireland, we have that additional baggage, that additional challenge of sectarianism and divide and conflict. So it's highly sensitive. It's a highly sensitive subject to engage with. So the object, as I said before, was an artefact from their personal world, from their own place. So it became a bridging tool between the personal and the private world of themselves and the interview. So in this slide, the first picture there is of, it's a pen with a little angel at the top. And it was incredible, you know, listening to this participant, because she, this service user, talked about how angels had guided her throughout her mental health experience and her mental distress experience. She talked about, you know, she has a son who wasn't very well, and she talked about whenever she was in hospital and she was doing some sort of crossword, you know, and somebody gave her a pen that had an angel on it. So this was this pen, you know, and she viewed that as a comfort for herself, you know, that she was being told that she was going to be, that this situation was going to be okay, and that she was being guided and being kept in peace about that. And she talked as well about, you know, how at a time whenever she had very high suicide ideation, that she was able to draw on those experiences and draw on this idea that angels were looking after her to really keep her from completing suicide. She talked as well about, you know, going to sort of tarot card readings and things like that, where the angels appeared again and she would find feathers in places. So it was incredible to be able to hear that from her, and whether or not I believe that or not is irrelevant. And I would suggest, actually, even as practitioners, whether or not we believe that or not is kind of irrelevant, in that it's about their inner world. It's about what means for them, and engaging with that, in a way that's supportive and positive, and recognises that, because it's not, you know, us sort of rationalising it or being logical about it isn't going to make it go away. We have to engage with that for them. And in the second picture, this was a lady who was given these rosary beads. A friend had brought them back from Bethlehem for her, and so this lady has a diagnosis of depression, long history of it, and so she would carry these around with her. And if it was ever a time where her mental health was very low, or she was having a difficult time, she would bring out the rosary beads, and even she would go and find a private place, even if it was in a toilet, anywhere, where she would take these out, you know, and use them to pray. So for me, as a practitioner, hearing that's a real insight into their inner world and what that means to them personally, and being able to engage with that as a practitioner, to acknowledge that and to be able to create space to talk about that. And so it was useful to be able to have the object to do that, and to explore the depth of meaning that it had for them. And in this slide again, we see more objects. So the top was a saint's card that a lady had with a little medal in it as well, and that you know, the life and the death of that saint meant a lot to her. So she was able to use that and to use that to pray. In the second slide, it was like a kind of a self-help hotline that she would call, and that, you know, that really helped her get up in the morning. That really helped give her structure and purpose to her day. And in the third slide there, it's a little miraculous medal that this lady holds around her, you know, and she views that as that she's being protected. But it was by engaging with these objects, allowing the participant to talk about what these objects meant to them, that I was really able to get at what religion and spirituality meant to them within their experience of mental distress in a much more powerful way, I would suggest, than just black and white questions or just kind of bland questions. You know, the object, by them holding it, by looking at it, they were able to construct that whole story around it. And in the last slide there, you know, this was a very weighty crucifix from a communion set. And, you know, it was incredible being able to see those stark images, you know, that they held for them. And just the weight of them, and sort of the starkness of the images on them, that they were so powerful for the service users using them. And also, I haven't put it up there because it wasn't appropriate, I felt, but for some service users, they maybe had like a wallet or a photographic ID of a deceased relative, and they would carry that around with them. So it was just, you know, that they would carry that sense of bereavement and mourning everywhere they went. But it was by exploring that object with them again that it was able to get at that depth of meaning for them. Now, the social workers also brought objects, but it was a lot harder. It was a lot more challenging to explore what religion and spirituality meant to social workers. There was a lot more defence up in the interview. many social worker participants either forgot or declined to bring an object with them. And from the outset of the field work and trying to get to in recruitment, it was interesting how many social worker participants were adamant that they weren't spiritual and that they weren't religious, and the object, the interview would only take 10 minutes. I mean, that's a quote from somebody, and it's like, okay, this is a great start, to be able to go in and do field work. But it was incredible how they immediately had rejected the idea of there being spiritual and the influence that decision had upon their practice. And also there was a sense that to be a better worker that they must be agnostic or atheist, and that would make them impartial in their practice. So there's this sense of neutrality, that by not acknowledging the religious, by not acknowledging the spiritual, that it made them a better practitioner. And these workers didn't bring an object with them because they didn't see it as part of their identity. And I alluded to this earlier about the importance of exploring, okay, well, why did you not bring an object, and exploring that further. And it was incredible, I think, how the participants, through taking apart the concept, taking apart what religion meant, taking apart what spirituality meant, that they were softened to the idea of exploring this subject. Okay, so the interview became a safe place to explore this subject, and it wasn't about pigeonholing. It wasn't about it wasn't about pigeonholing or trying to categorise people. It was about, what does this mean to you personally? And then there was a lot more free-flowing discussion about it. And even if they didn't bring an object, but it was apparent, that religion and spirituality were relevant concepts to their lives, even if they had rejected religion, okay, or even if they had some workers had a very tense relationship with religion due to family history and current family dynamics. They maybe had a very tense relationship with it, or maybe they had a belief in God but didn't attend formalised services. But there was still a relationship there. There was still a relevance of the concept to them personally. So the interview setting gave permission to social worker participants to explore their relationship with and their expression of religion and spirituality in a safe and supportive way. And and I think that became there was, through the interview journey, there was that initial period of tension, within the interview, where they were, I suppose, trying to suss me out as well. But they then began to relax into the discussion and were able to experience it and discuss it in a more relaxed way. And these are the more objects that people bought. And earlier I talked as well about the importance of holding these objects for the photograph, for photographing them. But it was just, the top object here, this was one that a worker had made with her daughter. So, and throughout the interview, she was holding it and she was sort of caressing it. So it was a very, very tactile object. And so being able to, for me personally as a researcher, being able to hold that object and to explore that object with her, there was a connection for me as a researcher of the power and of the importance that had for her in her own life. And this one at the bottom here, this practitioner was absolutely adamant. She said, I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, but I'm going to bring this object. And it was incredible being able to talk to him about where did that object come from, and somebody had given it to him at his mother's funeral. So it was just the weight and the importance of being able to explore those objects with them. And the use of objects is entirely appropriate within social work practice as well. We as workers go into people's private homes, we go into their lives, and they are surrounded by objects, and you yourselves probably have objects of significance in your handbag, in your wallet, in your car, these little mementos that you carry with us everyday lives. So it's appropriate in this study that we used objects in that way, but also I think it indicates something about in practice about being able to talk to people about the objects that they have around them on their mantelpiece, on their home, by their coffee table, that we can really get at more personal meaning making and more personal accounts rather than being stuck to the form that's maybe in front of us, and actually being able to engage with the relational within people. Okay, so what did mental health social workers say regarding spirituality in practice? And I'm smiling at this because this is about worker avoidance. I don't ask that question on the forms. So workers were acutely aware that there's that form, there's a little box in the form, that asks about religion, what religion are you? But they're like, I don't ask that question on the forms. So now this worker or workers that said that were often engaging with the idea of what that question meant as an equality monitoring exercise. Okay, so basically, are you Protestant, are you Catholic? Which box do you belong to? And that's it. Whereas there's more to that question than just that categorization. And this worker was these workers were talking about it, that they don't want to ask that question. So it's about worker avoidance, and they talk as well about assumed privacy. Okay, so this is an assumed privacy for the service user. So workers recognise that spirituality and religion are sensitive subjects in Northern Ireland, and so this idea of privacy has grown up around that. You don't, things that you don't talk about. You don't talk about religion. You just don't. So this idea of assumed privacy has grown up around that. So workers assume that service users don't want to talk about it. But earlier I said, that in the service user movement, that they are advocating for the importance of religion and spirituality being included. So workers then don't want to ask that question. And this links as well with the idea that the worker will willingly explore the subject. And you might have heard this in practice, that the worker will willingly explore that subject if the service user expresses it. But these views don't recognise the power which the worker has within this relationship to shape the subjects that are talked about and those that aren't. And as a less powerful individual, how does the service user know that they can talk about a subject that is highly culturally sensitive? So where's the permission giving? How do they know that they can actually talk about this subject? So they're not necessarily going to say, this subject is relevant for me if they don't know that it's okay for them to talk about it. And some participants as well also talked about their own views and experiences around religion and spirituality. And this is where I talked earlier about it, that some workers became quite tearful around the subject. And I was quite amazed at that. I was amazed at how, evocative the interview actually became for them. That they talked about their own experiences around religion and spirituality, and some of these were conflict related, and some of them weren't. But there was a clear indication of the painful emotion that the subject was for workers around the subject. So the subject was just too difficult to bring into practice. It was like the privatisation of self, that they just did not want to engage with the subject in practice. So this is about the worker baggage, the cultural baggage. And that there was too many difficult memories for the workers, so that they just could not engage with this in their practice. And they also talked as well about being sussed out, and we'll be all aware of this from our own backgrounds, that the service user, the worker's very aware that the service user is trying to suss out what background they are from, whether they're Protestant or Catholic. So by then actively asking the question about religion and spirituality, it's maybe like trying to point at the elephant in the room. It's just too sensitive. It's too difficult for some workers, and they talked about that at length as well. And we talk about this idea of tacit knowledge. We may not, we won't outrightly say here, what background are you from, but we know that it's very subtly going on. And so then by asking, okay, what if religion and spirituality are relevant subjects? It's like that's just too much. It's too sharp an identification. But all of these, and this last subject, less people go to mass or church, so it's not relevant unless I'm working with a minority ethnic group. So again, there's this assumption, and I think this as well. This finding doesn't really take cognizance of, yes, there may be dwindling church membership, but you only have to look in Easton or anywhere else to see the amount of self-help groups and self-help books that there are, and this growing interest in New Age spirituality as well. So, how much are workers willing to actually explore the subject and willing to go there with them? And throughout all of these assumptions, these all disempower the service user. Like, where is their autonomy of choice? Where is their right to choose to discuss something or not to discuss something? Because at the moment they're not actually being given that choice. The worker is just saying, and I'm not saying all workers are doing this, but I'm saying that in the study, there was an indication of that there was a discomfort for workers asking these questions, and that they weren't giving the service user the right to choose to ask those questions or choose to decline to answer those questions. And so what are mental health service users saying in the study about it? And I think what I want to sort of emphasise as well is that because the study is small scale and exploratory, there's not a it's not that all the workers are saying this and all the service users are saying that. There's lots of intricate nuances and intricate detail in this, and there's a diverse range of experiences and comments from people. So service users talked about being laughed at, being treated like they're mad, and that the recognition of being dangerous. So they were acutely aware of sort of the historical association between madness and religion, and so they were very, very reluctant to bring that and to talk about that within mental health services. They were concerned that, if I talk about angels, if I talk about God, if I talk about Jesus, if I talk about crystals, if I talk about any of these things, then I'm going to be treated like I'm more mad than I actually am. That they actually said that. But they were also concerned, and as well, about being laughed at. A service user talked about how whenever he had been admitted into one of the wards, that he wanted to go off and pray somewhere and to be able to find comfort in that experience. But he, talked about staff laughing at him. So he's had that experience of being admitted, and that's carried on with him. So he's very, very suspicious then of being able to talk about his religion, to talk about his spirituality within his mental health experience to community mental health workers. So they talked about they won't understand. So if this again goes round to the sussing out idea, so if the workers from a different denomination, if they've worked that out themselves and believe that they've worked it out, then they'll say, well, the worker's not going to understand me because I'm this. So the worker's not going to understand how important this is for me. So I can't talk about this question. I can't talk about the subject. And they're also concerned as well about offending the worker. Okay, so they were basically saying, we're not allowed to talk about that. We can't talk about that, and I'm worried that if I talk about how important it is for me to go to mass or how important these subjects are for me, I'm going to offend the worker. So for me, there's a question there again about the sensitivity and about the permission giving and the cultural sensitivity, and how do service users know that they can talk about the subject safely with the worker whenever they have these assumptions around the subject. Okay, just looking here again. And they also then said that sometimes if the worker was from the same denomination, I thought this was quite interesting, and it took a little time to kind of get to this, but if the worker was from the same denomination, then they said, well, they won't understand anyway because of my mental health. So there was just a complete shutting down, and they talked about, that the subject is so personal, so kind of private, so intricate to them, that an experience of mental health and mental distress, that the worker's not going to understand that, so they just couldn't talk about that depth of meaning to the worker. And I think this raises a question within health and social care practice about how workers and how we as workers engage with very emotionally challenging subjects, those very, very private, those very deep subjects. Do we have the time? Are we being given the time to actually explore these subjects in depth? Is it a very kind of services have become more about risk management and risk assessment and care management, which may not necessarily allow for and give scope for the time that it takes to explore these subjects that are very private and very personal and very emotional in depth. So how, and maybe that religion and spirituality is one aspect of those, of those difficult subjects that people just, that maybe there isn't the scope to explore. And then some people said that they don't respond to the cue. So some service users talked about how they would maybe say, oh, God bless you, or that, and that they were viewing that as a cue to give to the worker to pick up on what this subject meant to them personally, but that the worker often didn't pick up on that, so maybe it was just being viewed as a wee slip away comment, but the worker didn't necessarily engage with and pick up on that subject. And then I thought this was quite an interesting one where they said, I want to keep it outside mental health. And I think this is quite a significant comment where people said it's private, and this sits well beside social workers' comments about it being private, but it's not about it's not out of religion and spirituality being a sensitive issue that some service users want to keep it private, but they have actively chosen to keep an aspect of their identity outside mental health services. So it's almost like they don't want part of who they are to be brought into the mental health system. And so they were actively choosing to say, this is part of me, this is part of my identity, I know that this is relevant to my mental health, but I don't want it being brought into mental health services. And I think that's about them exercising their autonomy and their choice, and that they have actively reflected on that and made that choice themselves. And then the sort of final one is there. We don't talk about that around here. And that's, where service users were talking about in a voluntary agency, that service users are getting the message that we don't talk about religion and spirituality. And that's to do with equality legislation. That's to do about not offending people, which is completely appropriate. But then the undercurrent of that message is that we can't talk about religion and spirituality in a supportive and therapeutic way, that there isn't the permission, that there isn't the language, that there isn't the discourse for them to be able to package a conversation around that, which is about their identity and their meaning making and their recovery, because it's about not causing offence to other people. So they don't have that permission giving. And this relates nicely to the earlier comment that social workers will explore it if service user mentions it. But how will the service user mention it if the message that they're getting historically and socially is within mental health services that they can't talk about that subject within the service that they're receiving? So I've pulled out two sort of key quotes from social workers. Top one, I think it's an invasion to ask a service user about religion and or spirituality. And these were mental health social workers, which so for me, I thought this was quite incredible. I think it's something that we really don't need to know. I think more so in Northern Ireland. I bypass that question. I think about it. I don't ask it. And I've really made a conscious decision not to. I remember thinking this is a personal question. So, but I mean, I suppose my challenge to that quote would be, well, we as social workers, we are engaged, like we're public workers and we're in a secular profession, but we are engaging with the private and the emotional in people's lives. So how will people know that they can talk about this subject safely? And are workers potentially missing an avenue of recovery and a place of sort of meaningful discussion for the service user by purposefully not asking that question? And the service user says, I've never really approached it with them, mental health professional, or spoke to them about it, because any groups or discussions with them are all about your mental health and your physical health. To look after yourself mentally and physically, you'll be all right. I don't think we've ever mixed it with spiritual health. So there's this siloing, okay? There's this real separation here of saying, I have my mental health, I have my physical health, but spirituality has got nothing to do with that. But yet this participant throughout the whole interview was reflecting upon the value of his spirituality within his experience of mental health, and about how throughout his years of mental ill health that had been a positive sort of support and aspect of his mental distress experience. So there's a real contradiction there, and that for service users, that the interview actually became a place of reflection and I suppose realisation as well, that they were sort of connecting dots that they may not necessarily have been connecting before. They were saying, so can I talk about this? Is this okay? And others were saying, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to talk about this, because this is something that's really important for me, but nobody's ever asked me, nobody's ever allowed me to talk about this. And I thought that was very I thought it was very powerful for service users to actually be saying that they wanted to be able to talk about it, because they needed some of them were saying that they really needed to know whether their expression of spirituality, their expression of religion was an aspect of their mental ill health. So they were trying to understand whether their expression was a legitimate expression, like an okay expression. So these are the key findings. There's a real contradiction, and that's a key kind of headline from the study, that there's a key contradiction there, that practitioners recognise the relevance. None of the social workers said, absolutely that's not relevant. This is, they absolutely recognise that this is a relevant aspect of, for some people, experiencing mental distress. And this is the difficult bit, but that practice in the subject is marked with ambivalence and difficulty and controversy. And to talk about this, about it being an absent present, and that's the legacy of the conflict, that we in Northern Ireland are acutely aware of religion. It's been part and parcel of the sort of social fabric here for hundreds of years, and yet it is absent within social work practice is absent within mental health practice, I would suggest, that it's this absent presence, that it's there, but it's not explicitly engaged with or articulated. And earlier I talked as well about the focus on risk management and symptom management and risk assessment. And has that focus then, has there been a loss of relationship? Has there been a loss of actually engaging with the relational and really being purposeful and intentional in building that relationship up? Because, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that this is something that a worker is going to go in and talk about at depth in one, for the first time that they've met somebody. But the way that work happens at the moment, do we have the time, and are we given the time to be able to explore these issues in depth? And so there's a major issue there in terms of permission giving for both service users and social workers. This idea I talked earlier about the private and the public, that we are public workers but we're engaging with the private for service users and carers, that this is, and that there needs to be permission giving for service users and workers to be able to engage with the subject when appropriate and when necessary. And this need as well to improve religious and spiritual literacy in the secular profession. So this is again about the language and the discourse and how we actually talk about the subject, that moves it beyond the social political stuff, that actually says, okay, what does this mean for these participants? What does this mean for our service users? And this is where I talk about it being more than a cultural competence. It's about individual meaning making. It's about what it means for them personally, and about the transcendent and purpose finding in their own lives. And sort of the top and the bottom comments there sort of relate to each other. Service users talked about what's acceptable and unacceptable expressions of their beliefs. So they talked about people that they'd maybe seen admitted to hospital where they were delusional and hallucinating, and that that those delusions were taking on a religious aspect. And so they were saying, that's an unacceptable expression, that's a real indication of madness. So they had this sort of service user hierarchy of beliefs, where they were sort of layering people on top of one another, saying, well, this is acceptable and this is unacceptable. But that they were asking, what's too much? How do I know that my religious and spiritual expressions might be leaning towards an indication of me being mentally unwell, but actually when might it be an aspect of my recovery, and how can I use this as an aspect of recovery in a positive way? And this idea as well about holistic assessment that needs to be inclusive of beliefs. So when that we ask the question, and if they say, well, that's not appropriate, well, then you've given them the opportunity to talk about it. Whereas workers were saying, I really just don't ask that question. So the opportunity is not there. They're not being given the opportunity. And I've put this in about the partnership working with clergy and spiritual leaders. How much do we as workers, liaise with clergy? Do we engage with sort of hospital chaplains, that are able to that are professional in the health and social care setting, so they're able to offer advice in that way, but they also have that spiritual and religious aspect to their practice, obviously, as well. And there might be an opportunity to work in partnership there. And I've talked as well about this, person-centred care and recovery focus, should be inclusive of religion and spirituality. And this idea of professional boundaries, that a lot of workers talked as well about this, that, for me to talk about religion and spirituality, then it demands that I disclose some of myself. But, mental health workers will ask service users about, how often they're having sex, but it doesn't mean that they're disclosing how often they do it themselves. So I don't understand, religion and spirituality doesn't have to be of the same place as well. That you can, this again is about training and education, where we can talk about this safely without demanding self-disclosure from workers. And future directions for research could be in terms of raising the profile of discussing religion and spirituality as an aspect of identity and meaning making within health and social care education. So equipping equipping students, equipping future practitioners to be able to talk about this in a way that's safe, in a way that isn't within the danger of proselytising, isn't in the danger of trying to sort of be seen to be coercing service users who are seen as being vulnerable and at risk. That they're able to engage with this subject robustly and professionally and in a transparent and accountable way. Again, professional guidance and training to support staff to talk about these issues without fear of recourse. Again, further research about partnership working with mental health services and clergy and spiritual leaders. And this creation of safe places, and I talked about this in terms of supervision, and I didn't mention it in the findings, but a lot of the workers, there was a brilliant bit in the interviews where I had a senior social worker and then somebody that they would have given another social worker whom they would have given supervision to, and both people were talking about the role of religion and spirituality within their practice. Both of them were talking about how it could be relevant, but how they're not really sure how to deal with it and how to talk about it. And I asked the more senior one, did you talk about this in supervision? And they're like, no, I couldn't talk about it in supervision because I'd be concerned about how that would be viewed. And then their supervisee was then talking about, well, I would really love to talk about this, but I don't know how my supervisor would actually engage with the subject. So there's a real, and I thought that was quite funny in one way, but also quite difficult whenever, that supervision should be used. Even very occasionally should be used to be able to talk about those difficult subjects that are, but it should be a safe place to talk about those subjects in a way that says, okay, this is a relevant aspect of practice, so how can we talk about this, how can we engage with this, how can we enhance your practice that enables you to talk about these within your practice. And then permission giving for service users, patients, to explore the subject with their mental health professional and their religious leader as well. So that service users need to know that whilst they may not talk about religion in terms of sectarianism and political divide with other service users, that they can still talk about it, what it means to them personally in their everyday lives and what purpose it gives them within their experience of mental distress with support workers and even with other members within the group, that they can talk about it in a way that's supportive and meaningful and helps them process that experience as well. So I've put up some of the list of publications, and any questions, hopefully I can try and address. So yeah, that's me. Thank you. That's it. Sorry, I probably should have ended a bit better.
Yeah, thanks very much.